Welcome to this Fiction Brain Masterclass on fiction plot types. Here's a question most writers answer without ever examining it directly. What is the engine running your story? Not the genre, not the setting, not the characters. The engine, the underlying structural force that drives the narrative from its opening condition to its final one. Most writers, if pressed, will name a plot. Events that happen in sequence. A protagonist who wants something and either gets it or doesn't. That is not the engine. That is the surface. Beneath it, running every story that works, is a structural pattern, a shape the narrative is tracing, that determines what the story is obligated to deliver, in what order, and at what cost to the protagonist. Those patterns are what we call plot types. And there are 7 of them that account for the structural engine of the great majority of fiction across all genres and lengths. This masterclass maps all 7, shows how each one functions as a structural force, and builds toward the central craft question. Not which plot type is your story, but what does your plot type require, and have you given it everything it needs? What a plot type is, and is not. Before we name the 7 types, the definition needs to be precise. Because plot type is frequently confused with story, with genre, or with theme, and none of those is the same thing. Plot type is the underlying structural engine, the pattern of forces, reversals, and resolutions that drives the narrative from its opening condition to its final one. 2 novels can share a plot type and be unrecognizable as relatives. Jaws and Beowulf are both overcoming the monster. Great Expectations and Cinderella are both rags to riches. The plot type describes the engine. The genre, the setting, the characters, and the prose describe the vehicle. Understanding plot types gives a writer 2 things. First, a structural map of what the story is obligated to deliver and in what order. Second, and this is where it becomes genuinely useful for revision, a diagnostic tool. When a story loses momentum, when it fails to satisfy, when readers sense that something is missing without being able to name it, the cause is often a mismatch between the plot type the writer is running and the structural moves that plot type requires. 4 principles before the taxonomy. 1. Plot types are not genres. A quest can be a fantasy epic, a road novel, a literary journey of self-discovery, or a thriller. 2. Most novels run a primary plot type and 1 or more secondary types woven through it. 3. Discovery writers do not need to identify their plot type before they write, but they often benefit from identifying it after a first draft. 4. No plot type is superior to any other. The question is not which type is best, but which type is right for this story. The 7 plot types. The following 7 types account for the structural engine of the great majority of fiction across all genres and lengths. They are not exhaustive. Hybrid structures are common, but a writer who can identify which of these engines is running their story has a significant diagnostic and developmental advantage. 1. Overcoming the monster. 2. The quest. 3. Voyage and return. 4. Rags to riches. 5. Tragedy. 6. Rebirth. 7. The mystery. We will move through each one in turn, covering the structural spine, the hallmarks, the genre homes, and the primary pitfall. Overcoming the monster. This is arguably the oldest plot structure in human storytelling, present in myth, folklore, and the earliest recorded narratives. Its emotional core is simple and powerful, survival and triumph against a force that should not be survivable. The protagonist confronts an external force of destruction, a literal monster, a villain, a natural catastrophe, a criminal organization, any antagonist whose existence threatens the protagonist's world. The story's engine is threat, escalation, and confrontation. The structural spine moves through 7 beats. The world is established and the monster exists, offstage or in the background. The monster's threat becomes direct and personal. Initial confrontations leave the protagonist worse off. Escalation reveals new dimensions of the monster's power. The protagonist acquires what they need: knowledge, allies, courage, or a specific capability. The final confrontation arrives. And then resolution. The monster is defeated or neutralized, and the world is restored or transformed. 4 hallmarks define this type. A clearly defined antagonist, whose nature the reader understands early. Escalating threat. Each confrontation leaves the protagonist worse off until the final one. A moment of apparent defeat or maximum danger before the final confrontation. The protagonist must change in order to prevail. The person who defeats the monster is not the same person who first encountered it. The primary pitfall is the passive protagonist. A hero who only reacts to the monster rather than driving toward it loses reader investment. And the unearned victory. If the protagonist defeats the monster through luck or a capability never established, the resolution deflates. Working example. Jaws runs overcoming the monster with structural precision. The shark's threat escalates from background menace to direct attack to the destruction of what should have been the protagonist's strongest position. Then, the final confrontation, in which Brody, who is afraid of water, defeats the shark alone at sea. The transformation is literal. He has become what he feared. The quest. The protagonist pursues a specific goal located at a physical or metaphorical destination. The journey toward that goal is the story. The quest differs from overcoming the monster in that the antagonism is diffuse, rather than embodied in a single force. The obstacles are many, varied, and often environmental, social, or internal, rather than personified in one opponent. The emotional core is not survival, but desire and perseverance. The structural spine, a call to a goal that requires a journey. Departure from the known world, a series of trials that test commitment and force growth. The approach, when the goal comes within reach. The ordeal, which requires sacrifice. And then the reward and the return, the protagonist carries something back. 3 hallmarks define the quest that the other plot types do not share. A companion structure. The quest protagonist rarely travels alone. Companions function as foils, mirrors, and casualties. Progressive loss. The quest costs the protagonist companions, resources, and certainty. The closer to the goal, the higher the price. The goal transforms. What the protagonist sought and what they find are often not the same thing. The external quest resolves an internal one. The primary pitfall is the episodic trap, a quest built from disconnected episodes without escalating stakes or cumulative cost reads as a travelogue, not a story. Each trial must matter to the ones that follow. Working example. The Lord of the Rings. The external goal is the destruction of the ring. The internal goal is Frodo's endurance of a burden no one else can carry. The companions are progressively stripped away. The cost is permanent. Frodo cannot return fully to the Shire because the quest has changed what the Shire can hold for him. Voyage and return. The protagonist enters a world radically different from their own, experiences it fully, and returns changed. Unlike the quest, there is no specific goal at the outset. The protagonist does not go in order to achieve something. They go, and what they find determines the story. The emotional core is disorientation, wonder, and the discovery of what home means. The structural spine, the ordinary world, is established. The protagonist enters the other world, voluntarily or involuntarily. Initial wonder and disorientation follow, as the other world reveals its strangeness. Then the shadow falls. The other world shows its threat or its cost. The protagonist finds a way out or a way through. And the return, the ordinary world, is now experienced differently because of what they have seen. 2 hallmarks are non-negotiable. The protagonist is not equipped for the other world at entry. Their ordinary world skills and assumptions do not apply. The other world has its own internal logic. It is not arbitrary. Its rules, once understood, make sense. The primary pitfall is the unconvincing other world. If the other world does not feel genuinely different, if it does not have its own internal logic and its own specific texture, the voyage and return has nothing to voyage to. Working example. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court sends its protagonist into a radically different world and uses the contrast between 19th century industrial thinking and medieval social reality as the story's engine. The protagonist's ordinary world competence is his greatest asset and his greatest liability. The return is not triumphant. Rags to riches. The protagonist begins in a condition of deprivation, material, social, emotional, or spiritual, and achieves a condition of fullness by the story's end. This is not a plot about luck. The rags to riches protagonist earns their transformation through character, effort, and the capacity to recognize and seize opportunity. Stories that substitute luck for earning produce what might be called the Cinderella problem, a protagonist who is acted upon rather than acting. The structural spine runs through 7 beats: initial deprivation, a call or opportunity, initial success, a reversal where something is lost, the dark night of internal reckoning, the final ascent, and a new equilibrium in which the protagonist is equipped to inhabit what they have won. The reversal is not optional. A rags to riches story, without a significant loss or setback, is a wish fulfillment fantasy, not a structurally sound narrative. The fall is where the protagonist is tested, and the riches are never merely material. The protagonist achieves something internal, a sense of self, a capacity for love, a moral understanding that the external achievement represents. Working example: Great Expectations. Pip's great expectations prove illusory. His reversal is total and humiliating. What he ultimately achieves is not the gentlemanly status he pursued, but the moral understanding that Magwitch, not the cold Havisham world, was his true benefactor. The riches are entirely internal. Tragedy. The protagonist moves from a condition of strength, promise, or potential toward destruction through a combination of external pressure and internal flaw. The engine is the protagonist's own nature working against them. The reader sees the fall coming and cannot look away. Tragedy is the most misunderstood plot type in contemporary fiction. It is not simply a sad story. It is a story in which the protagonist's destruction is structurally inevitable given who they are. The sadness is inseparable from the recognition. We understand why this happened. The structural spine ends at the recognition scene, the moment the protagonist understands, too late, what they have done and why. That beat is not optional. Without recognition, tragedy becomes mere misfortune. 3 hallmarks separate true tragedy from a story that simply ends badly. The fatal flaw is connected to the protagonist's greatest strength. Ambition, pride, love, loyalty, the virtues and the flaws are inseparable. The reader sees the fall before the protagonist does. That gap is where the tragic tension lives. Tragedy generates catharsis, an emotional release and clarification in the reader. This is the specific payoff the plot type is designed to deliver. The primary pitfall in contemporary fiction is what might be called the half-tragedy, the protagonist who is partly redeemed at the close. That resolution often satisfies no one because it completes neither the tragic structure nor a redemptive one. Working example: Breaking Bad runs tragedy with classical precision across 5 seasons. Walter White begins with intelligence, pride, and genuine grievance. The fatal flaw is the pride that makes him need to be recognized as exceptional. The story moves with structural inevitability toward a recognition scene in which he finally admits, to himself and to his wife, that he did it for himself. By then, it is far too late. Rebirth. The protagonist is imprisoned in a condition of spiritual, moral, or emotional darkness, often without knowing it, and is released into a better self through an external catalyst. Usually love, loss, or encounter with authentic goodness. The rebirth differs from rags to riches in that the protagonist's poverty is interior rather than external, and they are often unaware of it at the story's opening. This is the redemption story. Its emotional core is the possibility of change in a person who seems, to themselves and to others, to be fixed in their worst self. The structural spine, the dark condition, is established. A catalyst enters and begins to crack the protagonist's closed world. The protagonist resists, sometimes viciously. Deepening darkness follows as resistance leads to a nadir. Then the turn: the protagonist makes a choice in the direction of their better self. And the rebirth: the protagonist is recognizably changed. The resistance phase is essential and should not be rushed. A protagonist who changes too easily has not been established as genuinely imprisoned. And the rebirth must be specific, not vague. The reader should be able to identify exactly what has changed and what it will mean going forward. Working example: A Christmas Carol. Scrooge is established in his darkness with specificity and even a kind of internal logic. The 3 catalysts crack him open progressively. His resistance is real, and the rebirth is particular enough that the reader believes it will hold. Dickens understood that the sentimentality of the ending is earned only by the completeness of the darkness that precedes it. The mystery. A disruption has occurred, usually a crime, but not necessarily. The protagonist's goal is to discover what happened, who is responsible, and why. The plot moves from disorder to understanding, from concealment to revelation. The engine is the reader's desire to know. The mystery is the only plot type in which the most important event, the inciting disruption, typically occurs before the story begins. Everything in the narrative is consequence and investigation. This gives the mystery its distinctive retrospective quality. The story is being reconstructed rather than constructed. Two hallmarks are structural obligations that cannot be negotiated away. Fair play. The reader must have access, in principle, to all the information needed to solve the mystery. A withheld solution is a fundamental breach of the genre contract. The investigator as the reader's proxy. The protagonist's process of discovery is the reader's experience of the story. The two move through the investigation together. The primary pitfall is the withheld solution. If the protagonist solves the mystery through information the reader was never given, the contract is broken. The revelation lands with anger rather than satisfaction. Working example. Tana French's Dublin Murder Squad novels run the mystery engine with literary-grade interiority. The investigation and the investigator's own concealed history are parallel structures, and the revelation of what happened in the crime is often inseparable from the revelation of what the detective has been hiding from themselves. The fair play contract holds even when the protagonist is not entirely reliable. Hybrid structures. Most novels run more than one plot type. The combinations are not accidental. Certain types have natural affinities that make them structurally complementary. 6 combinations appear most frequently. Overcoming the monster in quest. The protagonist must pursue something in order to confront the monster. Common in fantasy and action-adventure. Quest and rags to riches. The journey is also an ascent. Common in epic and literary adventure. Mystery and tragedy. The investigator is destroyed by what they find. Common in literary crime fiction. Rebirth and romance. The emotionally closed protagonist opens to love and is transformed by it. The dominant engine of the category romance novel. Voyage and return and rebirth. The other world is the agent of transformation. Common in fantasy and literary fiction. Overcoming the monster and tragedy. The protagonist defeats the monster but is destroyed in the process, or the victory reveals they have become what they fought. Common in war fiction and morally complex thrillers. The test for identifying your combination is simple. Identify what your protagonist wants most and what they fear most. The want drives the primary plot type. The fear determines which secondary type is running beneath it. The secondary engine is where the internal stakes live. Plot type and the discovery writer. Discovery writers do not select a plot type before they write. They follow the story, and the plot type emerges from the choices the characters make under pressure. This is not a disadvantage. It is a different relationship to the same structural reality. The practical value comes in 2 places. After the first draft, reading the completed draft and identifying which structural engine emerged tells you what the story is obligated to deliver, and whether those obligations have been met. A discovery writer who has written what is structurally a tragedy but is pulled back from the recognition scene has an incomplete draft. Naming the engine reveals the gap. During revision, when a section loses momentum, identifying the active plot type and asking what that type requires next is often the fastest diagnostic available. The structure knows where it wants to go. The plot type framework makes that knowledge explicit. For plotters and hybrid writers, plot type is a planning tool. Selecting the primary engine before drafting establishes the structural spine the outline must serve. Selecting the secondary engine establishes where the internal stakes will live. Neither approach is superior. What matters is that the writer, at some point in the process, knows which engine is running their story and what that engine requires. In closing, let's return to the question we started with. What is the engine running your story? The answer worth having is not the name of a plot type. It is a map. Which engine is primary, which is running beneath it, what each type structurally requires, and whether your manuscript has delivered on every obligation. The 7 plot types have been telling human stories since before writing existed. Not because they are formulas, but because they map the shapes that meaning takes when a character is placed under genuine pressure. The engine is not a cage. It is the thing beneath the story that makes the story move. Know your engine. Know what it requires. Then write the story only you can write inside it. The Power Tool. The companion power tool on Fiction Brain. Com maps each plot type in full structural detail, including the complete structural spine, hallmarks, genre homes, pitfalls, and working examples for all 7 types, plus hybrid structure diagnostics and revision exercises. Use it as a working reference alongside your manuscript. One final thought. Your story is already running an engine. Your job is to understand it well enough to run it on purpose. Now go write.